What's up, everybody? Welcome to RealGM Radio. Got a bunch to get to today in our first episode of the new year. I'm going to start with my thoughts on the Trae Young situation. They are reportedly open to trading Trae Young before the deadline. Looks like something is going to happen sooner rather than later. I'll give my thoughts on that, whether or not the Hawks waited too long to get to this point. And then, of course, we'll get to some fake trades and some potential destinations there for Trae Young. Then Bobby Manning, who covers the Celtics for CLNS, will join me to talk about this fun and great story out of the Boston Celtics, who are cruising right now and playing really well, playing really good ball. So we'll talk about everything that's going on over there. And then Nick Friedel, who covers the Warriors for The Athletic, is going to join me to talk about the dramatic, up and down, chaotic, always getting ejected Golden State Warriors and what their plans before the trade deadline might be. A bunch to get to. You'll enjoy it. Let's jump in. All right, let's get to this Trae Young stuff here. I've given it a few days since Shams and Mark Stein both reported that the Hawks and Trae Young are working together to find a trade before the February 5th trade deadline. I've read a bunch of stuff. I've heard a bunch of podcasts. I've got a lot of different takes on this. I've heard a lot of different takes on this. And I wanted to give it a couple of days to really kind of sift through my own thoughts and kind of find where I kind of landed on this. The obvious question here is, are the Hawks right to move on from Trae Young? And I think clearly the answer is yes. What I find interesting about this question, though, is that this is sort of one of the ultimate, I hate even doing this, but people who watch the NBA every day, like me and the people that generally listen to this show, versus sort of the casual fan that has a different maybe impression of who Trae Young is as a basketball player. And I hate kind of pinning like NBA nerds and casuals, like nerds, sickos, diehards against the casuals. I don't like doing that. It always comes off as pretentious. But Trae Young just isn't the player that he used to be. You could argue even the player that he used to be wasn't even the player that he used to be, right? Like when you're talking about impressions, you think about that run that the Hawks made to the Eastern Conference Finals. If Ben Simmons just doesn't melt into a puddle in that in the round opening those playoff in the round before, the Hawks don't make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. We're not talking about, oh yeah, Eastern Conference Finals Hawks, could they make it up there again? And Trae Young doesn't have those kind of moments, and we just have a different impression of that Hawks team and this Trae Young team. But because of that run, it just felt like Atlanta was always holding on to what could be. Hey, we made it to the Eastern Conference Finals once. A couple of tweaks, we could do it again. And so I think maybe the more interesting question is, did they wait too long? And I do think it's easy to sit here and armchair quarterback this thing and say, obviously they waited too long, because you think about what Trae Young's value was a couple years ago versus what it is now, where reportedly, according to Mark Stein, they might have to attach draft assets to Trae Young to get rid of him. There was a time perhaps where they certainly could have gotten something for Trae Young. You've heard it reported in multiple different places now that had they gotten a Godfather offer for Trae Young, they probably would have moved on from him within the last year at any point. That offer was never going to come, and I'll get to why here in a second. But it is easy in retrospect to say, yes, they did wait too long. And factually, that's correct. Obviously, they waited too long, because if they come to the conclusion of having to trade him, well, then you might as well have done it when you kind of gotten more for him. I'm not going to blame him for that, though. I think there's a lot of situations, even in recent NBA history, where you think, yeah, the writing was on the wall on this, and you probably waited too long. I think about breaking up Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, right? The Portland Trailblazers waited too long, and might have cost them a chance at more playoff success, because they were just so committed to trying to make that backcourt work, where everybody watching knew that there was an inherent ceiling on that kind of group. And that's just one example that comes to mind. There's 100 others that we could talk about. But I don't want to fault the Hawks here, because because of who Trae Young is, because of what he means to that market, and he is among the most popular Hawks players we've seen since Wilkins, that it is just, functionally hard to move on from somebody like that. The part of this too is that Trae Young was a good basketball player. There's not 5 better passers in the NBA than Trae Young. He's a pick and roll mastermind. There were a lot of good things that he was contributing to that team, and ultimately the Hawks ceiling did come down to Trae Young, right? They were going to go as far as Trae Young could take them. I would rather, in general, wait too long and not make a huge mistake and end up trading Trae Young somewhere and he ends up blossoming in that spot, than trade him too early and kind of be left with nothing. And let's also remember, Jalen Johnson just got here. He's Atlanta's best player. It's not close. He's going to be an all-star this year in the Eastern Conference. He looks like a guy that you could build around. Maybe not the best player on a championship-winning team, probably not. But could he be the second best player on a championship-winning team? Yeah, I think so. In today's NBA, absolutely, third best player for sure. I don't know that the Hawks will ever have that luxury, but Jalen Johnson is your second best player on a Final Four, Final Eight team. That makes sense to me. He's a two-way guy. I think he could be a little bit better defensively. LeBron James was talking the other day about how he can guard 1 through 5. I mean, can is maybe the operative word there. Does he do it all the time? No. I think he could get there, but I don't want to diminish what Jalen Johnson's doing. He's an awesome player, top 20 guy at minimum this year. So he's great, and he's your star. But again, he just got here. If you're going to trade Trae Young, you're going to trade your superstar. Every time you trade your superstar player, you better be getting something back that gives you a path, a ticket to your next superstar, whether it's a young player, a highly coveted draft pick that's going to end up at the top of the draft, or is just some sort of route to free agent money that you think you're going to be able to use in the offseason to go get that player. You got to get a lottery ticket to that next superstar. And had they traded Trae Young before, I don't know that they get that. Now they have that guy. Now they have that guy in Jalen Johnson. It becomes a lot easier, again, to then trade somebody like Trae Young. When you have a guy like Jalen Johnson, they signed Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's been tremendous for them this year. The team is ready to move on from Trae Young. But here's the problem, too. The league has pretty much already told you what they think about Trae Young. It's not to say that there will be no market for Trae Young. There's always going to be a market for these kinds of guys. There's going to be teams that take a swing on this, but you're not going to get maybe what you could have gotten for Trae Young a couple of years ago had you tried to more aggressively move him then. But I think that's okay. I think you're better off waiting too long and getting yourself to this point where you were ready to move on, as opposed to doing it too early and maybe making a big mistake. Would it have been a big mistake? No, right? Obviously, I'm trying to say two things here. They were wrong to wait this long. I'm not faulting them for waiting too long because I think it was prudent. Let's also remember that Hawks front office went through like a billion different front office sort of changes over the last few years. So maybe all of them were trying to do their own sort of evaluation on Trae Young too. And I think that's also worth pointing out here. But here's the reason why Trae Young why the market is what it is. And going back to the NBA diehards versus the casuals, I think a casual sees this report and says, wait, you're going to have to attach draft picks to Trae Young? What are you talking about? This guy's an all-star. Why is he viewed as a negative? Is this an advanced analytics thing? Is this a nerd thing? No, this is the league telling you what matters in today's NBA. The league doesn't care about dying on some sort of analytical hill or, eye test hill or old school hill versus new school. The league doesn't care about that. The league cares about winning basketball games and making money. And Trae Young might make you money, but he doesn't win you basketball games. And ultimately, that's what's going to matter and keep these guys employed, the people who are going to be making these decisions. Why is Trae Young's value not what we tend to equate players like Trae Young and their value to be anymore? Offense is so easy now that defense has never been more important. I think that might be counterintuitive to what some people think about today's NBA, where it is an offense-driven league, and you're seeing some of these scoring numbers and these historic offensive rating rates and all these things. And a lot of people say, oh, yeah, nobody plays defense anymore. I disagree. I think defense has never been harder. And I think offense has never been easier. So if you're looking for value, if you're looking for things that you can add at a premium, it's defense. Just because offense now is so easy. Because of the rules, because of the pace, because frankly, there's never been more skilled players, 1 through 15 in the league than there is right now, right? You see a guy like Michael Porter Jr., who's a third option in Denver, looking like an all-star right now in Brooklyn. There's a lot of scenarios like that. There's a lot of really skilled basketball players. That's why offense is so easy. But defense now, because the offensive skill set across the league is so good, defense has never been more important. And because teams are so smart now in attacking your weak links defensively, defense is also more important. Think about 20 years ago, 30 years ago in the NBA. The idea of having multiple minus defenders in your lineup wasn't a thing. That was not a thing. Nobody cared. Nobody cared if you had multiple minus. You could get away with it. As long as you had a 7-footer who could protect the rim, you were fine defensively. That was enough. That was enough to win, maybe not enough to win a championship, but enough to win a lot of basketball games. Now, you can't function that way defensively. You put 2 minus defenders on the court at once, you assume you're going to lose those minutes unless you have some sort of crazy Rudy Gobert style floor raiser on that end. Offense is so easy now. Defense has never been more important. And for Trae Young, who might be the worst defender in the NBA, the worst high minutes defender in the league, you have to be so good offensively that you're able to counteract all of that. And this is where we get back to the impression of Trae Young. I think we need to reimagine who Trae Young is as a basketball player, especially for the casual fan. He's not the all-NBA superstar Steph Curry disciple that he's sort of been associated with. So what is he? He's a guy who is, again, a genius-level passer who can run pick and roll with his eyes closed. But he might be the worst high minutes defender in the league. He's not a good outside shooter, a career 35% shooter. Shoots a lot of threes, does not make a lot of threes. He's not a good rim finisher. He doesn't really have a package below the three-point arc. And then above the three-point arc, his greatest trait is being able to take shots, not necessarily make them. So really the only thing he does at an elite level is pass the ball. Which is, again, he does at a very high level, an elite level, but everything else he's basically below average at. Even if he was an above average shooter, an above average finisher, you could probably get away with it. But when you're kind of a one-trick pony the way that Trae Young is, it's really hard to build things around you, especially when you're not very functional off the ball. His catch and shoot numbers off the ball, too, don't really inspire a ton of confidence over the years. So even if he were willing to play off the ball a little bit more, I don't know that he has the skill set to be impactful off the ball. So he's kind of like late career Russell Westbrook in that you kind of have to put the ball in his hands for him to be impactful. And he's going to have moments where he looks amazing, but there's going to be a lot of moments where he's a negative for you. And he's just not providing anything or taking things off the table. And to compare Trae Young, all-NBA, superstar, all-star kind of guy to Lakers, Clippers, Nuggets, Kings, Russell Westbrook, that's a very different kind of player. And so that's sort of reimagining Trae Young, kind of what we're looking at. And so you think of a guy who's making almost $50 million this year, has a player option for $50 million next year, and he's that much of a negative and an inconsistent player and isn't bringing a ton of value to the stuff that he does on the court in terms of what matters in today's NBA, no wonder you have to attach a draft pick to him, potentially here. Now, I do think that I haven't given up on Trae Young. I do think he's a good basketball player. I think there's a world in which it works. So I was trying to think of another comp, like what's the best case scenario for Trae Young at this point? Understanding that who he is as a basketball player is basically who he is. But if you can tighten the screws on a couple things here and there and nudge him in the right directions and pull some levers and push some buttons, what's the best version of him? Late career Jason Kidd? Is that the best spot for him? Jason Kidd with that 2011 title Mavericks team is kind of who I'm talking about. Floor general, can get hot every once in a while, and that's it. I think there's going to be value on the right team for a player like that, especially if you can get him at the price where his next contract is going to be. And that brings me to my next point. I think Trae Young is a really interesting pilot case for today's new NBA landscape. He is not going to be making $50 million a year plus on his next contract, which if you told Trae Young that a couple years ago, 2-3 years ago, he'd say you're crazy. The NBA used to be a booming, growing economy in a developing country. Everybody's salaries just went up. Everybody's salaries just went up. Everybody. Max players kept signing max contracts, and the new max contracts kept getting worth more as the NBA salary cap kept going up. Everybody just was making more money. It was Wolf of Wall Street. Everybody was just making more money. That's not the case anymore. And for players like Trae Young, who used to be a max player, who are no longer max players, nobody is going to pay him the max. The market's not going to be there. So where players like Trae Young used to be able to call their shots, if you're not going to pay him the max, I'll find somebody who will. Those jobs aren't there for these players anymore. Those salary slots are not going to be there for these kinds of players anymore. And so I think Trae Young's free agency, whether it's this summer if he opts out or next summer if he opts in to the last year of his lucrative deal and then test free agency 2027, is going to be a really interesting pilot case for today's new NBA landscape, which is essentially a hard cap, and where teams have to be much more mindful of how they're allocating their salary cap funds. Does Trae Young go from making $50 million a year to half that? Is half that even kind of overpaying for Trae Young? That's the really big question. And it's really why I'm interested to see how his free agency shakes out either this summer or next summer. All right. Potential landing spots for Trae Young if he is moved before the deadline, if there is some sort of market for him. We've already heard the Washington Wizards. I do think that makes sense. There's a lot of guys in that front office that were either grew up in the Oklahoma City Thunder front office or were inspired by it. You see where this makes sense. Trae Young as a point guard who can kind of get guys involved a little bit does make sense, even if he is a little too ball dominant for my taste. I do think having a guy who can organize that offense and put guys in spots and help a guy like Alex Sarr blossom into more of a pick and roll threat, help guys like Bub Carrington get a little bit more off the ball, Keyshawn George kind of unlock parts of his game where he can be off the ball a little bit more. I do think that theoretically makes sense, but more importantly, if you can get draft picks back with Trae Young, that's a very Oklahoma City Thunder type of thing to do. It's CJ McCollum is an expiring contract. Maybe you throw in a Corey Kispert. And if you're Atlanta, Kispert makes some sense for you. McCollum even makes some sense for you coming off the bench as a scorer. Expiring contract, doesn't have sort of the baggage that Trae Young comes with and those kind of expectations in terms of what his role will be. I think that makes some sense for Washington. At first, I kind of hated it. The more I've thought about it, I'm like, yeah, you know what? I don't hate that for a Wizards team that isn't really trying to go anywhere. I don't think Trae Young is such a ball-dominant guy that he's going to hurt the development of those kinds of players. Look, Jalen Johnson developed around Trae Young. Onyeka Okongwu has gotten better. Maybe not as fast as Hawks fans have wanted, but he's gotten better. Trae Young isn't like a minus in the locker room. He's not like a cancer kind of guy. So I don't think it hurts him that much. The Timberwolves are another team that you hear. I think it's really tough because of where the Timberwolves are with the apron, but they can make it happen with a third team involved, making a trade prior and kind of making things happen. Too hard to kind of go into all that stuff, but it is interesting to me if they can make that work. It might be a little too rich. It might cost you a really good piece like Julius Randle. It probably will. I don't think you're moving Jaden McDaniels in a Trae Young deal. I don't think you can afford to do that because if you add Trae Young, then you kind of need McDaniels defensively. But maybe there's something there. Two other ideas I had that I haven't seen anywhere else. What about the Portland Trailblazers? I know they have Damian Lillard waiting in the wings, but what is he really other than, a nice story, kind of mascot, late career Miami Heat Dwayne Wade who's coming off the bench. There's a lot of value in that, but he's not your point guard of the future. I don't know that Scoot Henderson is your point guard of the future. Could you move Scoot Henderson and Drew Holiday, those two contracts, to Atlanta for Trae Young, and both sides kind of just get off their own problems? Because the Drew Holiday deal has not worked out for Portland. That contract is looking really bad when you start to look at the next couple of years of that deal. Way overpaid for who he is at this stage of his career. And if you're Portland, you're not going anywhere. Is it worth taking a swing on a guy like Trae Young who can help get guys like Donovan Clingan involved, help organize your offense a little bit, help maybe Denny Avdia, for as good as he is, has value on the ball. Do you always want him on the ball? Probably not, even though you would hope that they could probably find a way that they could balance things, Trae Young and Avdia, in terms of being, maybe it's as simple as just staggering their minutes. But I kind of like that for Portland. I don't hate it. And then the other option I had was the Phoenix Suns. Could you do Jalen Green and somebody like Grayson Allen to Atlanta for Trae Young? That to me is also pretty interesting. Trae Young next to Devin Booker, a real point guard who can get guys involved, set those young group of centers up, kick out to a guy like Dylan Brooks. That to me is when we kind of go to the Jason Kidd reimagination of Trae Young. Is that something that makes sense? I don't hate it. I don't know how far you're going if you're the Suns with Trae Young, but I also know that Jalen Green doesn't really work there. You're trying to shoehorn one of Jalen Green or Devin Booker into that point guard spot anyway. So if you could turn Jalen Green into Trae Young, who is obviously a traditional pure point guard, that at least cleans up that issue. And then you could figure out what the next contract looks like, potentially. And I don't think, for the record, that trading for Trae Young, if what it costs you is Jalen Green and Grayson Allen and no draft picks, and hey, maybe you're even able to get a pick back, that's not like trading for Bradley Beal. That's not like trading Kevin Durant. In other words, that's not the Suns repeating old mistakes. I think that's actually potentially, right? Like a kind of a smart move for them. If they're able to get a guy, fill a team need without any future draft capital investment, without costing anything of yours in the future that you really need, and you get to take a flyer on a talented passer, sets guys up a little bit better. And on that next contract, if you can sign him to something manageable, maybe he could be the long-term point guard next to Devin Booker. Maybe that is something that could work. All right, that's it. Those are my thoughts for Trae Young. We'll be really interested to see how these next couple of weeks play out. Coming up next, Bobby Manning, Celtics reporter for CLNS. Coming up next on RealGM Radio. This episode of RealGM Radio is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's the holiday season, the best time of year for sports. Bowl games, basketball matchups, playoff pushes, it's all happening at once. And while you and I are out here making decisions every day, what gifts to buy, what to eat, which games to watch, there's one place where it feels good to be right. Prize Picks is simple to play. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats. If you get your picks right, you could cash in. Get in on the action. Prize Picks is now available in 45 states, including California, Texas, Florida, and Georgia. And on Prize Picks, how you play is up to you. If you want flexibility, choose Flex Play, where you can get paid even if one of your picks misses. And if you want the biggest payouts, go for the Power Play. No matter your play, Prize Picks is a great way to put your takes to the test. Prize Picks now offers stacks, meaning you can pick the same player up to 3 times in the same lineup. Want to pick more on Nikola Jokic's points, rebounds, and assists? Now you could pick all of them in the same lineup, only on Prize Picks. Prize Picks puts their users first, so all withdrawals are fast and secure. Prize Picks accepts most major payment methods, making deposits into your account quick and easy this sports season. So join millions of users and sign up for America's #1 fantasy sports app. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Bobby Manning, Celtics reporter for CLNS. We're talking Celtics, a bunch to get to here. Right now, they're second in the Eastern Conference. They have the best point differential in the conference. Second best on cleaning the glass. That removes garbage time, right behind the Detroit Pistons. But the point of the story is nobody expected this from a Celtics team that was obviously going to be without Jayson Tatum, but also went through some offseason changes, shedding some salary, changing over the roster, adding some new guys like Anthony Simons and others, and expecting leaps from a bunch of different kinds of their young players who were on the roster last year but weren't necessarily contributing a whole lot. Bobby, first, thanks so much for jumping on RealGM Radio, also a part of CLNS. Maybe the first time I think I've had you on.
I think so, yeah.
Usually I just go on your show, but now we switch things around because we got to talk about this Celtics team. They are one of the biggest stories, one of the best stories in the league from a national perspective. First question, how are they doing this?
I'd say a combination of Jaylen Brown's consistent, huge leap night to night here that he's taken, where he's been available every game for this team and great for this team every game. So I've given him the most credit for this start, but 1B is Joe Mazzulla, who I was excited about going in this year, getting the chance to make his imprint and have people see how influential he's been to this team's success, despite them having the best talent in the league for a handful of years here. That wasn't going to be the case this season. So he and his systems on both ends of the floor, his coaching, were going to be drivers of their success if this was going to be a good season. And he's done so much this season when you talk about lineup changes, in-game adjustments, the way they've tailored their system on both ends of the floor to the personnel that they have. And he's put so many players in positions to succeed this year. And they've gotten a lot out of White as well as Pritchard at times here. But when you look at the group of unproven players coming into this year between Nemesh Keita and Josh Minot, Jordan Walsh, any number of guys who have gone into games, rookie Hugo Gonzalez, Baylor Shireman. If you were going to get something out of one of those guys, you would have been thrilled this year. But they've been able to get positive stretches out of pretty much all of their depth this year, and all the way down to two-way center Amari Williams, who's jumped into a game or two here and there and done some stuff. So they've utilized the entire roster. They've, specifically with Walsh and Keita, gotten full strong seasons out of the sections that they've played. Keita obviously starting the whole season and Walsh for 20 games. And spurts from other guys have helped them be consistent, survive highs and lows from certain players, and play with a energetic, all-out hustle style that has allowed them to become a disruptive defense at times this year too, despite some of their weaknesses on that end of the floor. The offense is great, pleasantly surprising how great it's been given some shooting struggles that they've gone through here. And in many ways, I think they're 3 games off their pace from a year ago. It feels like they've just kept it rolling. I know they started 0-3, but ever since then, this feels like we're watching a similarly dominant, taking on all the margins, finding every little advantage Celtics team that we've watched for a few years now under Mazzulla.
Yeah, I want to start with Joe Mazzulla. I definitely want to talk about Jaylen Brown because there's a lot of fascinating things going on there and then what it means for the Celtics going forward. But Mazzulla, man, this was the year, right? Like we were really gonna know he was a good coach. We knew that. We were really gonna find out. Okay, is this guy one of the elite coaches in the NBA? Because I think with coaching, first of all, I always say this: most of coaching we don't see. A lot of
Yeah.
people think that coaching is when do you call a timeout, and we remember Mazzulla kind of under the gun by Celtics fans his first year, but never calling timeouts. But that's what fans see. Do you call timeouts? What's the cool sideline out of bounds play that you run? And that's probably 90% of coaching, right? And your rotations, and that's it. Coaching is like icebergs. We don't see most of it, and we can't judge most of it. But you do see the product of it, obviously, on the floor. And what Mazzulla has done with this team is he has kept it rolling, despite the fact that they're down their best player. They've lost Drew Holiday, who is one of the most liked guys in the league, a super impactful player, especially on the defensive end. You lose a guy like Kristaps Porzingis, who's an NBA Finals hero from a couple of years ago. All the things that made them the Celtics, they're pretty much gone, right? And they're like, all right, I guess Anthony Simons is here. We don't really know if we want this guy, but he can kind of shoot the ball and all these things. And Jaylen Brown, I think he's in the past shown his limitations as maybe a full-time number one option, not this year. But with Mazzulla, it didn't matter. He was just like, look, we're going to compete. We're not going to tank. We're not going to try to do all this stuff. We're not going to talk about rebuilding. We're just going to go out and play ball. And in today's NBA, where I think we kind of, the whole rings culture thing of this, where it's like, okay, either you're competing for a championship or you're trying to turn your roster into a team that can compete for a championship. And a lot of times we look at that second option as either tanking or making trades or rebuilding or whatever it is. I think there is so much value in stress testing a roster the way that the Celtics are, because they're probably playing up to their the highest potential, which is very good. Like this team is very good. There's a lot of value in finding out what this team is made of before you make any sort of decisions, because it's not just the Tatum injury. It's the fact that they have reset a lot of the books and all these things. There's a new era of Celtics basketball that we're approaching here, and figuring out where the roster actually stands as opposed to sort of artificially creating some sort of tank situation to get a better draft pick or whatever it might be. I think there's a ton of value in what they're doing here, regardless of how this season turns out. I think Mazzulla deserves a ton of credit. You're absolutely right. The guy has mastered the margins of the game, just mastered it. He knows exactly how to move a screw just enough to the right to fix the whole thing, and everything just kind of comes into play here. And the other part, and I'll end here on my Mazzulla point. Not only is coaching like icebergs, I think coaching is a lot like musicians, where you want your coach to be able to rap the verse and also sing the hook.
Yep.
You want range, right, from your coaches. I think there's a lot of coaches who are really good schematic wise, but not necessarily that great in player development. And I think Mazzulla the last couple of years showed that he's schematically really good at implementing a system, developing interesting defensive schemes, offensive schemes, and all these things, and getting buy-in from veteran players. And that stuff is insanely valuable. He didn't show much in the developmental phase because he didn't have to, right? It was a veteran team. He's shown a ton this year in terms of player development, getting guys in position to succeed, and actually, breaking news, coaching, which I think a lot of head coaching in the NBA comes down to player and ego management. There's very few coaches who are actually coaching in terms of hey, let me make the players on my team better. Let me coach them to be better players by the end of the season. Mazzulla is doing that, man. I cannot emphasize how impressed I am with him.
It's amazing, too, this stretch to end the new year. There was a great range of games. I'm sure you remember the Heat one, where they closed that game with Hugo Gonzalez at center, effectively, alongside Sam Hauser and Anthony Simons. Completely overhauled the lineup they were playing to begin that night, close on this big run and win that one going away. They won a game at Toronto when Toronto was the 3 seed without Jaylen. And that was something, with the way he started this year, you thought, are they going to be able to even compete in a game without Jaylen? And they went up to Toronto and won, I believe, on a back-to-back without Jaylen. And so there was a stretch of games there. They put Luka Garza in the lineup that night after he hadn't played in a month, and that started a new run for him here. And then they're down 20 to Indiana after that stretch of games. Bench the starters for almost the whole third quarter and have the second unit effectively get them back into that game. And then they put Jaylen back in for the fourth, and he, leads them to the finish line there. 4-game win streak around that time. They lose to Portland on the road, start a 4-game win streak up right again as we record this here. And I don't think they've lost more than 2 games in a row this season, which is just incredible. They've had a handful of bad losses, Utah, Brooklyn, Portland, namely. But every time they've had that bump in the road, the 0-3 start too, you can mention, they've just gotten right up and rolled again, or they've changed the lineup, or they've adjusted a rotation here or there. What they've gotten out of the young guys in particular, as you mentioned, is pretty amazing this year, especially Hugo Gonzalez, who I thought could have just been a draft and stash guy. And he's been a fixture to their rotation at 19. It's been unbelievable what they've gotten out of the depth of this roster this year.
Slam dunk draft pick, Hugo Gonzalez. What a draft class. I mean, you're just up and down this class. I mean, there's just guys who are contributing, but he's sort of the perfect thing for the Celtics. It's, hey, in what could have been a down year for us, we just need a guy who's going to play his ass off, and this guy's just going to play his ass off every single. That guy's flying around. He's a connector type, which I think those guys are always super underrated. But I don't want to yada 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 over the 0-3 start, because that 0-3 start could have just kind of shook the foundation under this team. You're like, you know what, we just don't have it this year. That's just what it's going to be. I guess we're just going to kind of have one of these down years like the Pacers are having, or teams like that. And for Mazzulla to continue getting that buy-in is huge. Let's talk about Jaylen Brown. Look, we've seen this in spurts from him. Obviously, Finals MVP a couple years ago. Like he's done it at the highest stage. He's never done it for this long as the number one guy. What's the biggest difference in his game that you're seeing?
Yeah, to go back to the Joe stuff, I feel like they together embraced a new style for this offense that fit Jalen's skill set, which is the mid-range game. And he's been the best mid-range shooter in the league this year. I think it was him and Shea for a little bit, and now he's even with the 50-pointer against the Clippers there. Moved past Shea for mid-range efficiency and volume this year, and having that balance between the two. So I think being able to take a part of the floor that a lot of defenses aren't guarding heavily has been huge for his success. But he's also continued to adapt to what he's seeing from defenses. I think over the last week or two here, teams finally trying to figure out what the Celtics team's going to do, have gotten more aggressive in trying to throw double teams and traps and, bring the big up and pick and rolls against Jaylen. And he's had a 10-assist game, 11-assist game against Utah over this last week or two here when they got more aggressive against them. Had a 27-point first half against Portland where the Blazers in the second half went all out to take him out of that game. And I think that was a good thing for him to go through here recently, to see that he's going to get more pressure here going forward. I think another thing, he was 34th in free throw attempts at one point, sounded off about it after the Cavs game, the way he'd been officiated to that point. And I'm sure made some adjustments too that has gotten him up to 7-8 free throws a game since that night. And I believe it was Cleveland where he sounded off about the officiating. So I think he's been vocal. I think he's been consistent in terms of showing up night to night and giving you something you can expect in every game. I think he's only probably had 3, 4, 5 clunker games in this schedule to this point, and he's only missed 2 games, I believe, to this point. And I thought a real important moment, you mentioned the 0-3 start. He had a hamstring injury the last game of the preseason, and it looked like he might miss some time to start the year, but he played the opening night, played the first 3 games. He's on the injury report night in and night out through that stretch. But they're 0-3. They have a back-to-back in New Orleans. He's on the injury report as questionable, I believe. Looked like they were lining him up for a back-to-back rest night. And he played, said he needed to after an 0-3 start. And he wasn't sensational that night, but he gave them 20. It was a 25-minute guy in that game. And it was a close one for a lot of the night, and they pull away late and get their first win. I felt like that was so important, him showing up for that game, him being committed to the start of the season where it didn't look like it was going great. And he's been just driven and motivated, the Eastern Conference Player of the Month snub story by this point, finding every little way he can to get himself going in a lot of these games, helping young guys. we'll start having like a first team All NBA MVP conversation with him if this thing continues here. And I think there are so many we're always talking about narratives with MVP. You think of him getting this done without Tatum, moving into a bigger role. I think that's a big piece of it. But there are also little stories with him, like that 0-3 story. And he was a big reason. Jordan Walsh was a DNP CD to start this year. He went to Mazzulla and said, this is a guy who could maybe guard opposing best players, be a bit of a defensive disruptor. And, actually Walsh credited with Jaylen with getting him into the rotation after he was a DNP for, I don't know, 3 of the first 6 games. And eventually he becomes a starter and a fixture, one of the bigger stories of the season, Jordan Walsh. So there's a little off-court leadership stuff with him too that I think stands out from his start beyond the 30 points per game that he's given them every night, which is still amazing to think that he's been that consistent, that effective, that efficient. He's doing it on like 51% shooting with all the attention of the defense on him. So, I mean, he's been top 5 player period in the league this year.
No question.
You can't put a ceiling on what he could become, it looks like.
Well, that's the interesting part, right? Is it kind of felt like we were there. We kind of knew what he was a second best player on a championship winning team who at times could be the best player on a championship winning team. But he's taken a leap here. I mean, he's averaging more dribbles per touch than ever. As you know, that was like the big bugaboo about his game a couple years ago where he couldn't dribble left or whatever it was. Like he's averaging the most time in possession. Obviously, that's because he's the number one option, but he's doing it like he's not just dribbling to dribble, right? Like he's out there with the most efficient numbers he's ever had in his career. So he's got the ball more and he's been more efficient. His rim finishing has never been better. He's shooting 54% in those long 2-point range. Like to your point, he's the best mid-range shooter in the league right now. All the spots that you're not supposed to shoot from and a Joe Mazzulla offense, right, ostensibly kind of got rid of. He's like, that's cool. I'm going to eat all this stuff up. But that's the territory of star players, and Jaylen Brown's there. And I do think it's interesting to think about what this team looks like when Tatum comes back. And this is not you got to trade one of them because we're way past that. But it's like, okay, like to your point, you did change the offense a little bit. You empowered Jaylen Brown. You're seeing what he can do where he's sort of like this hammer kind of player where the rest of this Celtics team is kind of, I would say, like a finesse offense, right? It's a lot of perimeter screening. Let's get into those threes. Jayson Tatum is a strong player. When I say finesse, I don't want it to be like soft, but that's kind of his game.
They're
right?
Jump shooting team, yeah.
Jump shooting team, yeah, it's probably better. Jaylen Brown, like I said, he's just a hammer through a door, right? Where if all that stuff's not working, he's just going to break it down. And to include both of those things, I do think is interesting, and in a good way. I think having Tatum play off the ball a little bit more, that's just like the gravity that Tatum provides, all that stuff. I mean, it just feels like this offense could be even better if and when Jayson Tatum when Jayson Tatum comes back.
Yeah, and I do hope it's this season. As we record it here, it's going to be, I believe, 8 months now since the surgery into January here. We'll get to 9 in February, where a lot of guys have come back. Drew Smith, as you know, was back in 9 months, and Isaiah Jackson. A lot of guys.
Smith, the player Celtics fans talk about the most that's not on the Celtics roster. I just feel like I hear the Drew Smith comp.
You should have seen in Boston the night that the Heat came up a couple weeks ago, the media scrum around Drew Smith before that game. Probably the biggest of his life.
He's like, I don't even get this in Miami. What are we talking about?
Unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, everyone's excited about what he did. And, poking around the Heat, it's like, okay, this is a guy who's fighting for his NBA life. Obviously, he's going to come back after 9 months. The Celtics aren't going to be rushing Tatum to do that. So he's in a different position, different body, different career than Smith, certainly health-wise to this point. But it's encouraging to see guys come back that quickly. And, I got to talk to Kevin Durant a little bit about his process too. And he's like, the surgery's changed, the whole process of recovery. And this is just 2019 when Durant went through that. But, he said Tatum, Lillard, those guys have gotten new procedures, less invasive. And obviously the time frame coming back from those things has been shorter for a lot of guys who've gone through that. So I think there's real hope for Tatum coming back this year. And I'm glad if that's the case that it will happen that way, because he's not going to be Tatum right away. He's not going to be able to play the minutes, take on the load that he typically would in this offense. And it's helpful to have Jaylen doing what he's doing and playing in the role that he is in that regard. And I think it will be beneficial to Tatum to play off Jaylen a little bit, take some of the shots that are available to him in catch and shoot situations because of that. And obviously be able to do what a lot of guys playing around Jaylen have been able to do. Derek Pritchard and attack closeouts and make some secondary plays, a lot of those situations, getting defenses scrambled. Like, I think there's only a benefit to seeing Tatum come back, especially because I'd say the two biggest weaknesses for this team right now are defensive versatility inside, being able to guard bigger players, and the rebounding. I mean, they're about the worst defensive rebounding team in the league, and those are two things Tatum excels at. So
Right.
he gives them that at the very least. I think he is capable of playing a role. You obviously don't want to ask Jayson Tatum to be a role player, but I think initially to find a rhythm to impact the team consistently and to win, which I'm sure they all want to do this year at this point, it will be helpful to him, I think, to play a more ancillary role. Not an ancillary role necessarily, but one, maybe even coming off the bench where he and Brown can stagger a little bit to end this season if he is on a minutes limit for a month, however that's going to work there. So, I've talked a lot about that. I don't say it as a way to knock Tatum or say step aside because Jaylen's got this now, but I do think you have to reimagine that partnership a little bit to where you're not just giving Tatum the ball and saying, step aside, Jaylen. Not that that's what they were doing previously, but there were stretches where that would happen. And I think you're seeing Jaylen can absorb defenses and make reads out of it in a way that could benefit Tatum even more. Because the one thing I'll say about Tatum, the offense came hard to him. Like tough jump shots, dealing with a lot of difficult shooting nights. Playing in traffic, like there's just so many situations where you'd say, oh, it just looks like a grind for Tatum to score out there. And if you have someone else who can set him up for easier baskets, I think that's beneficial. And they both do that, right? And I think, in this whole conversation, when we talk about how's Tatum Brown going to work, it's great to be able to just have one of those guys on the floor at all times, when the other's not. And I think that's the real power they have over maybe any other team going into the future here, is that they have two of those guys signed long term, and what they're both capable of. Obviously, there's some questions coming off an Achilles, but I think you're thrilled. There was a question coming into the season, obviously, Wes, of do you keep both of them together? Can you just have Tatum, Brown, White, and whoever and win? And this year, they've been able to just have Brown, White, Pritchard, and whatever, and they've won. So I think you throw Tatum back into that mix, into that dynamic now, and they're going to be able to, if they find decent value players around those 3-4 guys, contend in the East. Like that's all they need, it looks like.
That's why you have star players, right? As much of a luxury it was to have guys like Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis and this loaded roster that was really expensive that they had to tear apart. That's why you have guys like Tatum and Jaylen Brown, is that you can just go out and find value in other places. I make the comparison all the time to like the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, right? It would have been nice to keep Mahomes and Tyreek Hill together forever, but the NFL has a hard cap. They had to choose one. Obviously, you pick the quarterback, but the quarterback is enough of a star where they're able to make it work and they end up winning more Super Bowls. So,
and they lose 4 guys this offseason, and 3 look like the right move. Luke's tough. He's killed in San Antonio, but they've gotten K to step up at that spot. So, you could argue all 4 of those moves, letting those guys go, were the right moves.
Agreed. Last thing on the Durant comparison, because I think it was a good one. I agree with you. Look, with Tatum, it's not black and white, right? You hear people talk about like, oh, he shouldn't come back. Just take the whole year off. Come back totally healthy. It's like, there's risk in that too. And the one thing we know, there's nothing better than 100%, right? Once you're 100%, you're 100%. And when Tatum's 100%, and if there's still basketball games being played this season, then you should be out there, because you don't get better than 100%. Yep. So if all the doctors are checking him off, then you go out there. And Durant, when he came back from his Achilles, he played 30-ish games for Brooklyn when he came back at the end of that season. And then the following year was had one of the best seasons of his career, averaging 30 points per game. He was on MVP ballots, second team All NBA. Like, he was back with that Nets team. It looked as good as he ever did in that 2022 season. So I do think there's a lot of value in Tatum coming back, and I think everybody hopes that that we see him again at some point this season. Last thing here, before I let you go, trade deadline. How should the Celtics approach it, understanding that maybe there is a path in the Eastern Conference here, because it's only wide open because Tatum got hurt, right? So if you think about it, like, okay, if Tatum comes back and we can fortify a couple of spots and maybe get a big or something like that, should that be the approach, or should they be thinking longer term, or should they just do nothing? Like, what do you think should be the approach out of Boston?
The thing I've heard throughout the schedule here is that they are going to look long term. I think this team's going to only make a move if it benefits them in the long term. So it does make sense. I know Michael Scotto had some reporting yesterday as we record this that Vika Zubac is a guy that they had some interest in, signed long term, can be a staple at center. And they have to find that, right? I love Keita. I think he's been sensational, and I think he can be a big part of the solution going into the future. Garza's had moments as well. But you would love to have a staple at that position, the way you did in Porzingis and Horford and some of the guys who've been at that position for them in recent years. Zubac would be phenomenal, and I don't think the Clippers are going to move off him necessarily. But that's the only type of situation I'd move off Anthony Simons now. And it's a tough decision that they're going to face with him. They're 12 over the tax. I think at this point in the year where they've been successful, you pay some tax to keep this team together ultimately. And I know it's a boring answer, but the win for Celtics fans, I think, would be keeping this team together, getting Tatum back down the line potentially, and going for it with this group that's been so good and so consistent all season. I don't know how I feel about Simons being here long term necessarily. I think there is an argument they're going to have a full mid level this summer. If you can keep them with some percentage of that, and then maybe use another on getting a long term deal done with one of their younger guys, I think that be a good look for them into the future. I think they're 20 under the first apron line or the tax line, whatever that is, going into this summer here, when some deals come off the books, including Simons. So it's been a tough fit. I think Simons has probably played a smaller role than 27 million would warrant in many cases, but it does help that he's an expiring. So at the very worst, you're getting 27 off the books this offseason and doing something else with that, or at least part of that potentially going forward here. And when you've look back at the summer and some of the reporting that's out there on Simon's value, I just don't see any reason to attach a pick to a guy like that who's helped you and who has grown in his game and in his role this season. I've really liked the way that he's played this season. And I love a guy like Nick Claxton. If you could get something done there with that contract, I think that'd be a great fit for this team into the future. But with how many picks you're potentially giving up in these scenarios for a center, and with how enticing Simons' performance has been this season, and could it even grow and expand beyond this season playing alongside Tatum and Brown at the right price, I'd probably say no on a Claxton Simons thing. And Zubac, I'd have to think long and hard about it, especially with all the picks that would be going out to LA in that scenario. But I might even lean no in that situation, because you said it, Wes. Like, they have drafted, they've developed, they've shown their ability to integrate young players in a way around Tatum and Brown that makes you think, all right, like, that's the path here in this new NBA environment. It's not a $20 million center. It's finding a guy in the draft or free agency or who's been overlooked and acclimating him to the system. So I think you stand pat if you're the Celtics at the deadline and see what this team can do down the stretch, make some of your moves in the offseason, and run this thing back next season with Tatum and Brown.
The way that they've done things, like, there's no rush, right? Like, the window is now wide open for this team. So to your point, like, this is not a team that needs to make some sort of desperate move at the deadline. I agree with you. Bobby Manning, CLNS, thanks so much for jumping on, man.
Thank you, Wes.
My good friend Nick Friedel is here. He covers the Warriors for The Athletic. Nick, you were just saying right before we started recording, never a dull moment there in San Francisco. As we're recording this, the Warriors are 19 and 18. They're 8th in the Western Conference. Up and down, I think, as much as any team in the league. Steve Kerr just got ejected in a loss to the Clippers. I don't have a stat in front of me for this, but it's safe to say that the Warriors lead the league in ejections this season. How would you describe the vibe around this Warriors team?
Wes, they lead the league in interest, too. This is the most interesting team going, and it makes it even funnier because they are a 500 team. As far as how everybody's feeling and what the vibes are day to day, it is just a nonstop soap opera. Something is always going on with this team. You lived it. You covered it out here with me for a while. I don't think the group is in some kind of bad place. I mean, I've been around teams where everybody was miserable going in on some days. That happens. I don't get that sense from the Warriors. I think they still know they have Steph, and so you always have a shot night to night. And Draymond and Jimmy are Hall of Famers who are still trying to kind of find their way with the rest of the group this year. It's just that the talent they thought was going to be there in a championship level, it just hasn't been what the entire organization thought. I think the gap between where they are and where they wanted to be is pretty big. And that's really the issue about halfway into the season now. There are a lot of layers with this team. There always are. But at the core, the talent just isn't matching up to the expectation.
You've heard Steve Kerr recently say things like we're a fading dynasty, or even give interviews where basically admitting we're not going to compete with younger teams like the Thunder and the Spurs and teams like this. I think it's really, like you said, you and I have covered Steve Kerr for a long time. We know kind of how he is with the media. He just says it, right? Like whatever, he'll say what is on his mind. There's really no chess game being played there. And I appreciate it in a lot of ways. And we also know that there are times where his honesty has kind of gotten in the way of things, right? That he's, taken some heat for that kind of stuff. This comment to me is really interesting because it's sort of an admission of, yeah, we're not going to win a title. Would you just even the Wizards aren't out there being like, yeah, we're never going to win a championship. You know what I mean? Like teams, like NBA teams just don't say stuff like that. But I do think it goes to something that I've been saying for a long time. Basically since the 2022 championship for Golden State is nothing else. Like all of this stuff is just gravy, dude. Like when we're talking about Steph, and that's really what we're talking about. When we're talking about the Warriors, you're talking about Steph. And for him, he's not in the resume building part of his career anymore. He's not in achievements anymore. He's for moments. Everything Steph Curry related right now is moments. And I think the Warriors are right to say, you know what? We're probably not a championship winning team, but can we be good enough to play with honor? And there's value in that. And to make a playoff run, maybe win a series and give Steph Curry a night on a big stage. Like, let's play for some of these moments where we can hang on to some of that stuff again. What did you make of those comments from Steve Kerr recently?
Steve is a very honest guy, Wes. You mentioned it. I think he is more honest day to day than any of his peers, certainly. Yeah. in the coaches that I've dealt with in the past, he just says it. And he says it because he's lived in the league as long as he has. The Warriors have had the success that they have had, which is crucial in all of this. But on a broader note, to what we're talking about, that's really the difference. And that's the shift that's undergoing right now out here with this team. It's that there's this feeling of, all right, they're probably not going to win another title. It's not going to happen. And you still have to enjoy the Steph experience and the Steph show for what it is. But in so many ways, Wes, they're a victim of their own success, because the expectations are so gigantic that there's that feeling of, it's the Warriors. They'll be there in the end. They'll find a way. And those days are probably gone. It's just not the way that it's meant to be for teams to compete for a title every single year. And that's something else that Kerr has said several times, that, this is the real NBA. It's the struggle every day of trying to figure out, can we win? How does it look? The problem is that when you win at the level that they've won for so long, anything else is going to be a drop-off. And that's where they're at. This team can still be good and beat anyone on their best nights. What made the Warriors so great for so long was that they were beating everybody on every night, it seemed. And those days just aren't here anymore.
So let's dig into this. Why are the Warriors not where they wanted to be? Why is it that they've been so up and down? And frankly, they have been disappointing, even despite the fact that maybe expectations were always maybe a little bit too high for them, even based on a more conservative expectation like I had. I didn't put them in my championship contenders tiers when the season came in, but they're even below what I thought they would be. Why is that? Because here's the thing that sticks out to me, Nick, when I'm watching these Warriors games. The Warriors don't just lose, they throw up all over themselves. Like, no team, their losses are just embarrassing every time. It's an ejection from Steve Kerr or Draymond Green. It's a costly turnover. It's some sort of drama, to your point, right? Most interesting team in the league. This team can't just go into a game, go into an arena and just lose, right? They can't just make it miss league. They can't do it. They have to just puke all over themselves. The frustration builds. Something something boils over in the fourth quarter, and there's drama that ensues. Why is that?
The reason the team is where they're at record-wise, Wes, is the talent just isn't there. I mean, that at the core of every problem that the Warriors have, the reason that they are 500 this year and every single game is close and it's defined by a couple made or missed shots and an ejection here and there and the emotions go all over the place. It's that Steph is still at the highest level.
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy is still very, very good, but he's not the dominator that he had been even a few years ago, night to night. Draymond really, his level on a nightly basis is eroding, and he's not the same player he once was even a couple years ago. And then once you get past those three, because they're the Hall of Famers of the group, Wes, we can go down the list. Al Horford was supposed to be a key, crucial piece to this puzzle. He's been terrible. I mean, he's just been terrible. He's been hurt. He doesn't play both sides of the back-to-backs, but he's been really bad. That's just reality. Kuminga, and I know we're going to get into all of that stuff, but Kuminga started off playing well. He got hurt. He came back. He didn't play well, and now he's not playing at all, and there's all the speculation there. Moses Moody was supposed to take another step this year. That hasn't happened. Same with Pods. That hasn't happened. When you break down the roster and you look at the talent where it was supposed to be and the talent where it is now, that's why the Warriors are where they are. And I know, and you do too, you open up social media and the fan base is frustrated and people are all over Kerr. My point is Kerr's not above blame. I mean, he's stuck with guys too long. He finally moved Buddy Hield out of the rotation. Buddy Hield, another person, supposed to hit threes. He's shooting 32% from threes. When you have this many guys not playing up to the level that we're used to seeing them play at, this is where you have big problems. And I think for the Warriors, the real issue is the younger guys that we're supposed to develop have not developed at the level that they thought. When you combine that with the fact that Draymond and Jimmy are getting a little bit older and aren't playing at the same highest level we're used to seeing them play at, you get what you get as far as where they're at.
It does make you think about the what ifs, right? Had they taken another path? The Jimmy Butler trade, I think, is a really interesting sort of crossroads for this organization because they make this gamble of a trade, which I think, as you know, even they at the time would admit it was a little bit of a risk, but it was their all-in move, right? And it was their all-in move to try to compete for something. And down the stretch of last season, it really looked like it was a move that paid off. It looked like they won that trade pretty outright with the way that Jimmy was playing for them. He helped their free throw attempt rate. He got turnovers down. His on-off numbers were what they have been for the course of his career, where he just has this crazy outsized impact on the on-off stuff. This year, he's been bad, right? Like, he's not been... not bad. That's unfair. This year, he's not been that. He has not been what he was for them over the last couple months of last season. The free throw rate as a team, he hasn't fixed it. They're still a bad free throw rate team. They still turn the ball over a ton. All the things, in other words, that Jimmy Butler fixed down the stretch of last season, he hasn't been able to single-handedly fix this season. Maybe that was always too much to expect from him at this stage of his career. But then again, they are paying him $50+ million this season and next season. And so when you make that the all-in move and it doesn't exactly pan out to the degree that you needed it to pan out, that puts you in a tough spot. And I do understand why fans would be frustrated because, like I said, if you have realistic expectations for this team, I think there's a way for this team to have not had to be winning or competing for championships, but still be a lot of fun and still be like rewarding for fans to watch and just be rewarding for us covering the NBA just to watch them be like, oh, this is a great way to send Steph out. This doesn't feel like a great way for Steph to spend the final few years of career again, because it's just so frustrating night to night. But it's because of those expectations that you were talking about. I just wonder, like, I'll just ask it to you straight up, Nick. I've been starting to think this. I think the Warriors lost the Jimmy Butler trade.
I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go that far because Jimmy did help them, and if he didn't fall on his backside and mess up, his tailbone last year, who knows what happens? Steph gets hurt. We know that story. Wes, I think the difference is when you look at Miami, are they in that much of a better place without a guy that they know could carry them through to the highest points? I know they didn't win, but
I'd argue right now, yes, right? Like they've got the flexibility that the Warriors don't have. They've got the draft pick in Jonas, Norm Powell. They were able to add him because of the money they saved with Jimmy Butler. Like all the flexibility that they had because they moved Jimmy Butler. The vibes are very good in Miami right now. They're not the team. They're not the team.
And
getting
I don't
injections
doubt
every
that.
night.
But if we're going to the playoffs, still give me Jimmy Butler over whatever the Heat have going on. And I say that knowing that Spo is one of the best coaches in the game. Bam is Bam. He's awesome.
I take the Warriors in that conversation, not because of Jimmy, but because of Steph, right? They
100%.
have nobody even on the Steph level.
100%. But I think it's a fascinating topic a year later because, to your point, there is more context now. There's more perspective. The Warriors are absolutely struggling. I'd only say this in regards to the Jimmy conversation. He may not be at the level that he was even a couple of years ago when you and I were covering the finals in Miami. I think Jimmy can still turn it on when he needs to that level. The problem, and this is a deeper commentary on where the Warriors are at. The Warriors, Wes, this team was built for like April. Right. They were built for the biggest of games, and we're going to get days off in the playoffs and just give us a shot against somebody that's not OKC or Denver in the first round. And, let's see how it all plays out. The problem is the way they're playing, it may not even get to that point because they just have that feel of a play-in team. So now you're playing a game or two extra. Then you're getting into a first-round series, likely against OKC. I mean, who knows without Jokic how the seedings play out in the Western Conference. But I think it's very interesting. I would still say, though, where's the end game for Miami at least this year? Like, what is that highest tier? Because Jimmy gave them the confidence that they could play all the way up to the level that they got to. Miami might be in a better place, and everybody might be feeling better that he's gone, and that cloud of, oh, my God, what's going to happen today? That's not there anymore. My argument back would be, okay, that's great. Well, are they going to get bounced in the first round? Hey, maybe they win a first-round series. Well, what happens in the second round? So as far as that part goes, though, I think we can have that conversation again another year from now and see where everything's at.
No, for sure. You're talking. Here's what I'm thinking. The Warriors are a team full of ceiling raisers. They don't have any floor raisers, right? Like we remember covering the Warriors team that had Steph playing at maybe the highest level he's ever played at. The second bad year that they had, not the first bad year where he broke his hand, the second bad year. And as great as Steph is, he's not a floor raiser type. He might be the ultimate ceiling raiser, but he wasn't able to, and that was a bad Warriors team, so maybe that's not necessarily fair. And he did drag that team to a play-in tournament. They did lose to Memphis, but and maybe that's saying a lot. So maybe he is a floor raiser. But this stage, Steph is not that stage Steph. He's still very good, top 10 guy. But those are still two different players. Jimmy, to your point, is not a floor raiser at all in the regular season, right? He's looking to be carried in the regular season, and then in the playoffs, he's a ceiling raiser, as we've seen multiple times. Draymond Green at this stage in his career can still kind of do the Jimmy thing, but on the defensive end, where it's like, oh my God, this guy is still the best defensive player on the planet. But it's not an every night thing for him. Draymond Green, also a ceiling raiser. This team does not have a floor raiser, and they are losing the margins every single night, right? Like the possession battle stuff that everybody's obsessed with in today's NBA, where, hey, don't turn the ball over, offensive rebounds, all this. They're losing all of that stuff. Free throw rate, like they're losing all that stuff. So we can, I guess, have the trade deadline conversation now. Age is a problem for this team, no doubt about it. All the little categories that we're talking about. Does this team need another center? Could they add some size? I think yes to all that. I think they can use some scoring. They're bottom 10 in offensive rating. Like they need somebody to come off the bench and score. Like you said, Buddy Hield hasn't exactly been that. Pods, I'm not really sure what his job is anymore. Is he the point guard? The backup point guard? Is he the kind of microwave scorer? Like what's he or is he supposed to be the connector like he was when he took Clay's job in his rookie year? Like what's Pods' job anymore? I don't know. I'm going through a tangents, but I think what this team needs more than anything is just one or two players that can help raise the night-to-night floor of this team, where I think a lot of people are looking at the trade machine and being like, who's the superstar that we can add to this Warriors roster? You know that's really hard. The superstar that they added was done. They did it with Jimmy Butler. That was the big superstar move. Now I think it's some other types of moves to kind of, again, try to raise the floor of this group.
I agree completely, especially on the offensive side, because Wes, this team's problem, and it's crazy to say with a team with Steph Curry, the problem is they just cannot create much offense. It is unbelievable on a nightly basis to watch this team just kind of struggle, and it's what Kerr has pointed out many, many times where Jimmy has helped him, even this year, is he comes in the game, and you lived it in Miami. The guy can get to the foul line with the best of them still. And he's going to the line 10, 12 times a night, and he's calming down the offense. The issue is, aside from Steph and Jimmy, who are at a very advanced stage in the NBA, where is the offense coming from? And that's the issue. I think the point about the trade machine and what can happen, it's well taken, because so many people, at least in the Warriors fan base, is sitting there going, all right, well, let's just find the next Jimmy deal. That's not happening. They're hard capped. I mean, to make a deal as a hard cap team is difficult on its own. When you have a piece in Kuminga that hasn't been playing, and it's really beauty in the eye of the beholder as far as the basketball talent goes, you have to find the right place to get him. And what are they going to get back in return? I think it's why publicly Dunleavy and Kerr have continued to say, hey, the answer is within, because I think they see what's out there. I mean, my point to Warriors fans is look at the numbers and the possibilities. Like Jeremy Grant, Drew Holiday, do they make you better in theory because Kuminga's not playing? And so, yes, like they would play, assuming Holiday is healthy and gets back. I guess, like I don't know. I mean, that's Wes. The issue for the Warriors is that magic fix isn't on the way, and they've got to do their best with what they have in the moment, and what they have in the moment is not good enough compared to what they used to be.
I think they need to add size. They're playing lineups with Gary Payton II as the nominal power forward in some of these games. And just like, what? I love Gary Payton II, but come on, like that's crazy. They need to add some size. To your point, I don't think the Jeremy Grant, Drew Hall, I don't think that's it. Okay, cool. More overpaid, past their prime players, awesome. Like we didn't have enough of those already. I look at a guy like Jalen Pickett, who goes off for Denver the other night for 29 points in like a surprise win. Like they don't have a guy that just does that, right? Maybe Kuminga was supposed to be that guy, and he's just out of the rotation now. And then maybe that's on Kuminga, maybe it's on Steve Kerr. It's probably a little bit on both. I would just be looking for those kinds of maybe one microwave guy. Can I go out and get that? Who can, in a game in January, can you just go out and win us a quarter, right? And like just the amount of relief that would give this team once a week. Once every week and a half, every 10 days. Just something like that, as you know, is huge through the slog of an NBA season. And then I would try to just upgrade some of these. Like, can we find like a better Moses Moody, a better Guy Santos? Is there a player out there that's just a more consistent version of that? And maybe it's not this great, huge, like superstar deal. Maybe it's just kind of getting in as a third team on a bigger trade, and you're just able to grab like what the Spurs were able to do and get Harrison Barnes a couple years ago. It's like, hey, that player is actually kind of nice for us. That kind of just helps solidify a spot in our top 9 in our rotation. Something like that. I do think something like that. A couple moves like that could go the wrong way, the right way if you hit them. Make the right moves.
I agree, and the only reason I'm hesitant on trying to figure out who that player might be and what it would take is, Wes, I still, even if they've found better versions of the players that they have now, I don't think it takes you past OKC or Denver.
No, for sure not.
And now, I know they beat San Antonio those 2 games where Steph went crazy earlier in the season, but Wemby really seems to be finding his own stride. We haven't talked about Kevin and the Rockets and what's going on there. I'm just not sure where the leap is going to come from, even though the schedule was bad to start and they've got a lot of home games coming up. I think that there are a lot of wins on the horizon for this team. But again, you have to alter the expectations if you're a Warriors fan, because the expectation always was we're going to win the title or we're going to compete for the title. And I don't see that happening anymore. So I'll be just as curious as everybody else to see what move or moves is made. I just don't see, as I'm looking through the possibilities, that major move that's going to happen and going to make everything that much better.
We agree on that, right? I just think make some kind of move that you can turn those games where you're throwing up all over yourself at the bar to just a normal loss, where you just walk out of the bar. The girl said no when you asked for her number, and that was it. You could just move on to the next one. It doesn't have to be some giant thing every time you lose a basketball game, and just make some of these games a little bit more enjoyable. But yeah, those are my expectations. Nick, always a joy. Thanks for jumping on, man.
It's always good to see you, buddy, and I will see you somewhere soon, I hope.
For sure.